Hello, and welcome to the DoneJS Contributors Meeting. Today is Friday, September 22nd, 2017. My name is Chasen, and we've got a lot of people here today. Let's go ahead and say a quick hello. Want to start, Brad?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brad, core team developer with Toby. Nice to be back.
Good to see you.
I'm Justin. I went to a Vue.js meetup and got a black eye.
Oh, that is rough.
I won, though. I won.
That's
see
good.
the other framework.
Jillian, you want to say hello? Nope, not working.
Jillian seems to be having audio problems.
Okay. Matthew?
Hello, Matthew. Hi.
And Sheriff?
Hi, I'm Sheriff from Algiers, Algeria.
Hey, good to see you. So today we're going to do things a little bit differently. Usually we go through statuses first and demos and what have you. But we're launching a community survey today. The first survey is going to go out sometime after this contributors meeting. And we want to take the opportunity to talk about everything that's going to be on the survey. Justin, do you want to kick us off with the items for CanJS? Sure.
Do you have your updated list of items?
Yeah, let me post that.
Should send this link out to like Gitter or something too, so people can. So I have it.
Yep. Okay. I'll post that in Gitter too.
All right. So let's go, as I guess is my prerogative, by the ones that I care about the most. So I'm going to do the ones that I care about, not necessarily the ones I think users will care about. So the one that I care about the most is cleaning up, hopefully finally putting a nail in the coffin of ordering issues with computes and things that derive their values from other values. And this issue not only addresses that, it also, oh, by the way, Chasen, if you haven't already, start a timer, because we don't want to go for more than 5 minutes on any of these.
Sounds good.
And maybe put that in your screen so I can see it, know where I'm at. So really, this queues for error-free and traceable code is going to do two things. It's going to make it, one, hopefully solve in a better way a lot of bugs that we've already solved, and there's probably still bugs lingering, but this should solve all of those bugs. Because what it does is it formalizes how and when code is supposed to run inside CanJS. CanJS already kind of has a queuing system because of batching. This formalizes it, will make it well understood by everybody, including all of the authors of it, and should fix a lot of problems and just make generally computes and things like it a lot easier to deal with. The other thing it's going to do is, because it's structured so nicely, it's going to allow us to understand, or as a developer, users of CanJS, to understand what caused essentially like a stack trace, but a stack trace through the observable system of CanJS. So let's look at a quick example here. So let's say I just, I have a define map here, and then it's got a first and last name, it's got a full name property. I have a compute that is calculating the full name. And then when that compute changes, although really you shouldn't be doing this code in CanJS, but it happens, everybody does it. And a lot of applications I see is they listen to full name change, and then they might mutate some state somewhere, right? They might listen to event handlers themselves and mutate some state. I'm changing the full name here. And then this map's full name event is going to be fired and called. Right, and all this is going to happen because I changed the first property. It's going to kind of flow through this compute, then this change handler, and this debugger, or and this full name callback. Now, what if you could know somehow, hey, why is full name actually getting called? What led to it being called. In CanJS, looking at the stack trace, it's not always so obvious what happened. So what I want to do is help people with that. What this would log, if you put what I want to do is if you get can-queues and you called log stack at any point of your code inside one of these callbacks, it would give you something like this. Okay, map1 dispatch the full name event. That's what just happened. And then what happened before that was, it's basically from top to bottom, so you can almost kind of read it. You know, again, all of these proposals are subject to change, but the idea is when you're going to vote for it, this is what we're going to do. Really starts at the bottom. Map1 dispatch the first event because it changed. Then the full name was derived from on compute 2. Then the change event was fired on that compute, which then caused a dispatch of full name. So this would allow you to know, why something got called. You would essentially look to the last line of the log and say, oh, first changed. And I can walk all the way up through my code and see what happened. So the rest of this issue, actually, I think it talks about, I think in one of the comments, I also put down you would be able to log the queue entirely. Let me see if I can find that. So if you had a similar setup, I also showed that if you just logged the queue, the difference between log stack, which kind of tells you the actions that led to your particular point, but you can also just log the queue and see everything that's going on, every handler, essentially callback handler being fired. You can know what was fired and what phase of the queuing system it happened in. And just as a quick, I don't know how much time I've got left.
Got about a minute left.
So it talks about like how the queuing system works, which is really good to understand. Essentially, there's going to be 3 different queues. A notify queue, which is essentially if an observable changed and needs to tell other observables it changed, it tells them in the notify queue. And then when computes need to actually update their values, that happens in the derive queue. And then the mutate queue are event callbacks that might actually do further mutations of the state, right? This is an example of a handler that's fired. If you're binding, those bindings actually happen in the mutate queue. Because what happens in here, who knows what a user might do? They might change the state, do all sorts of craziness. The big thing that we're doing is separating out essentially computes listening of first and last from how the user would normally listen to first and last. And by separating those, we can give much easier updates inside CanJS. So it just fixes a lot of bugs, and it kind of talks about a few of the bugs that we found related to this problem.
I think that's all the time we have for this one.
Cool. Next one. That's near and dear to my heart. This one's actually easy, but I think this is important. I think CanJS is super intimidating to a new user. You click API docs. Yeah, we got this little core thing here, but I mean, infrastructure is really big, ecosystem is really big. There's a lot. So I want to find ways of really addressing and simplifying this problem. The other thing that's wrong with it is it's just organized by like collection instead of really purpose, right? There's things like can symbol. Oh, that's kind of a JavaScript polyfill, right? That only does JavaScript stuff. All these can event ones, especially the DOM ones, these DOM ones are for DOM stuff, for event listeners in the DOM. It really doesn't tell you like what is it, can compute, what the heck could that, I mean, if you know computes, sure, you might be able to guess what, you've heard from Ember and other frameworks that have computes, oh, you might be able to guess what that is and guess what routing is. But if you're a new person, this is really not stash. What does that mean? You build mustaches with that? I have no idea. So I want to solve those problems. I've I'm not a UX designer, so this will eventually probably go to Bitovi's UX team and things like that for their assistance and help. But I just came up with what I thought is a relatively simple solution, which would be to allow people to kind of toggle. Again, this is not the final design. This is just ideas towards it. The problem is what you're voting for. So the idea is we show things broken up by what they are. So can-define is an observable. Here's things related to views, can-stache bindings, can-component. There's things related to your data modeling, your service data, can-connect and can-set. And there's things related to routing. Now, by default, we only show what's in the core collection. And then you could click infrastructure, ecosystem, or legacy, which might change to deprecated. And then if you were to click, for example, infrastructure, well, you would start seeing the infrastructure libraries included in that list. And that would be helpful because, of course, can-simple map is an infrastructure observable. And you would see, like, start seeing DOM things show up. And it's just much more, I think it's better organized that way. So vote for this if you want to see CanJS's documentation cleaned up. Next one. So this one is to, this was because to be honest, I was motivated by the Vue. I'm stealing some ideas from Vue here, really because I didn't have the guts to do what they did because I thought it was crazy. But if it works out for them, I feel like we try it, which is they will make any normal object or array they see observable. They'll just like duck punch observability into everything they see. CanJS, you tend to work with define map or define list, separate types that you have to create that are observable. I was, until seeing that they were actually successful with it, I've always been like, that sounds crazy to me, but they make it work. So I think we should give that a try, and it's pretty easy. Essentially, this proposal is making it so there's an observe method that will essentially make all the objects, or make all of the properties of this object at this time observable. Now, they won't have a bind method like define maps do, but that's okay now, especially because we have can-reflect. They'll have the necessary symbols to make them observable. So you'll be able to listen to them. Same with arrays. If it sees an array. And then also, if you add it to this object, like if this object had like nested objects when it was created, those would also become observable. Now, the problem with this is the same problem that Vue has, which is without proxies, you have to have every single property defined before you make something observable. So this discusses ways of dealing with that. So either we object seal things to let people know, hey, you've just added a property to something that's sealed. Go make sure the property is there. That's kind of what we do for define map. I don't think Vue does this. Or we tell users to use like a get reflect kind of thing, so that if the property is not defined yet, if you're reading it in a compute, that's okay. You could just put in can reflect get object last, and it would still call observation add, which is really what you need to set up observability. So why are we doing this? The real reason to do this is because, again, I'm trying to figure out ways we can reduce what a new user needs to know about to be functional with CanJS. And they need to know about currently define map. This would remove the need for that because, especially if we coupled this with can-element would start using these under the hood. So it would just like everything would look like normal objects. You would never have to learn about define maps, define lists, or even observables are there at all. You just look like you have normal objects. The only reason you have to learn them is for these kind of hey, you don't have that property already defined. But that won't even be as much of a problem because what we can do is use the proxy version in browsers that support it. So this talks about all of that. Vote for this if you want to see, I would say, CanJS simplified for new users. Also, you would be able to use Lodash on everything, these types of objects and arrays. So that's a big win also, is that things just, what people are used to would just work, but those things become observable. Okay, kind of going in my gut order here. Next thing is make CanJS easier to debug. So this one I think is important for obvious reasons. It can be tricky to understand what affects what in CanJS. So let's just take a look at a really simple example and talk about the problem here. So here I have a stash template. I have my full name, and I have two inputs. One is crossbound to first, the other is crossbound to last. I have a person view model that has a full name compute and a first and last property. So I'm just rendering this with this view model. Now, if you were just, this is a very small application where it would be obviously pretty easy to tell what's going on, but to a new user, it still could be tricky, right? Like, how do you know where full name comes from, especially if this is going across a lot of different components and values, right? How do you know where full name sources of data is? That full name comes from the compute, which comes from the first property on the view model, first and last property, which those also in turn come from these inputs, right? How do you see that? And in addition, if you were looking at each input, if you're looking at input, like this first input, how do you know what it affects, right? How do you know it changes the first property on the viewed model, which can change the first property of full name, and then eventually work its way to the DOM. And then the final thing, so that's two of the problems that I want this issue seeks to solve, is what do you affect and what are you affected by? And the final thing is just, it's hard to know in CanJS when something changes, right? Like, you can, of course, go to a view model, listen to on the full name changing, and then set up this logging yourself. That's onerous, and it even gets worse when things are on components and tucked away. So those are the three problems that this issue is attempting to solve. So vote for that if you want to see it solved. The proposed solutions is a can debug module that you could pass it pretty much anything in CanJS or a DOM node, and then it could log, like saying, hey, that text node, the H1's text node, that is dependent on the full name expression, and it would print out the text node and the current value of that expression. It would then say that is dependent on the person view model's full name, and it would provide you, when you see angle brackets like this, this means it's actually logging what's ever there. The user's not going to see just bracket view model. They're going to log the actual view model, so you can click on it and debug it. You can inspect it. So it would say, hey, here's the view model, here's that function that you can see if you wanted to set your debugger there, and then it's going to log the current value. And that depends on first and last, and they depend on the input value, their respective input values. And this should have been Meyer, but hopefully you understand what I was going for. And like we have a log child dependencies, there's going to be a log parent dependencies, which if you got the input, the first input, you could see, hey, what is changing this going to possibly do and mess with? You could say, oh, okay, well, that's going to change the first property on the person view model. It's going to log that current value, and it's going to log it's also, interestingly, because it's cross-bound, it would also log itself. So it would actually log that input as Justin, because it means that, well, person view model, changing that actually changes the input. So you could almost identify those cycles, right, through bindings where things are kind of cross-bound. But changing the first property is not only going to change the input value, it's going to change the full name value, and then it's going to change the full name expression. So you could get all of that information. To know when state has changed, I simply want to put a log method on practically everything, and it will just log when those value changes and what the new value is. So if you logged a view model, and if you changed the first and last property, you would see the first, last, and then you'd also see any computes that might have derived from that. Any value, including computed properties, would be logged. You can limit the scope if you like to only first, and these things would be practical. Log methods would be practically on everything.
I think that's all the time we have for this one.
Oh, okay, cool. So support JSX-like template syntax. Kevin worked on this one, so I'm not as gonna sell it as well as I could, but basically make JSX something like JSX, very close to JSX, has all the benefits of JSX, work with CanJS. So the real benefits for something like JSX is that it is part of JavaScript inherently. So you would be able to do all of the same sorts of things, like define inline functions and use ternary operators, spread operators if you're using Babel and things like that. So the proposal walks through this, but the big advantages that we would try to add on to JSX is that because you're using observables, you shouldn't have to call set state or should component update, right? In some ways, what this would allow us to have is the best of both Vue and React, is that when something changes or when something changes, we know about it and can immediately update the template. We'd also have one-way and two-way bindings. We probably would have support for virtual properties like resolved and is pending on promises, which can be nice. That way you don't have to like always copy your values to some type of other observable. You know, if you have streams now, streams are observable, like directly usable in stache. We'd like to keep that in our version of JSX. And so, yeah, those are the benefits. This issue walks through how what an example could look like, what the transpilation looks like, the technical details. There's a lot to this, but vote for this if you want a JSX-y type templating engine for CanJS. You want to use basically JSX just with a few minor changes to allow it to support the things that CanJS does really well. The next thing, and now I'm not going in really any, oh wait, I'm not really going in any order. Although this one's cool too. They're all good ones, really. It's like picking between 9 babies. I mean, obviously you have your favorite, the queuing, but the rest of them, they're all pretty amazing too. So this one is essentially, we're going to work with custom elements. That's mostly it. we're gonna support custom elements, and the idea is that we want to allow if people it's kind of two things. Like if people bring in either custom element like Shadow DOM, custom element polyfills, or the browser supports it, we will add all of that functionality. We will work with all of that, and this allows you to share components across different you can use a CanJS component then with like an Angular component quite easily because all of the logic is encapsulated in a component. There is a can element project already that uses this. To give a little bit more about this, the idea is there'll be like a can element, and the big difference is there's not like a distinguishable view model from your element anymore. If this were how can element were to be used and you have an add method, you can actually create an other thing element and then directly call add and count and read the count property on it. There is no separate view model from element anymore. So that's really nice from an integration perspective, of course, with other things, but also cool that like just anything can just go and change an element or dispatch events on that element and it just works.
Yeah, can I just say one thing? What's kind of exciting about this to me is, this is a replacement for can component. So like all the things you don't like about can component, we have an opportunity to fix here. So something that you use a lot, we're able to get kind of a completely fresh set of eyes and do everything like the nicest way we can. I'm done.
Yeah, that's true. So some other things, there's some other things that we've talked about fixing are like, right now, because we use a control for our events object, it's kind of weird that you have to write these, in brackets element or brackets view model to distinguish whether you want to listen on the element or the view model. We thought about just separating it so there's like your delegated events, and then there's your things kind of more on the view model. But we haven't gotten too far into specifying what this looks like yet. There's still a lot of wiggle room because in reality, your element is your view model with can element. So it's more like you're just trying to listen to the properties, and this is trying to listen to the DOM inside of the element, and this is more listening to the properties on the element. But things like that we want to clean up and just kind of smooth out. Any other sales pitches you want to throw in here, Matthew, for this?
No, I mean, like I said, I think it's a great opportunity that we can just kind of like redesign can component from scratch almost. So that's what I like about it.
And one thing I should say for all of these things, like as much as we can, you should be able to use can component right alongside of can element, right? And a lot of the infrastructure utilities are going to be shared across both. So it's very likely that if you were to load both, you're not really adding like more than a couple kilobytes to your overall project, maybe like 2-3 kilobytes if you were loading can component to start loading can element. So some of these things are not, our goal is to not have breaking changes. That's why we did all of CanJS 3.0. If we do have breaking changes for a 4.0, it's very likely going to be in things that everybody hates and wants to get rid of. Or there's like things that we had to fix bugs, we had to change to fix bugs. Next is StealJS 4.0. So this is, this issue is basically what we want to do is make a stash remove the worst parts of stash. The things that are the most confusing for people. Also possibly make it easier to debug. Stash was designed to say, hey, let's just take handlebars, comply with that spec. And I think that's a terrible spec for debugability and a whole bunch of other reasons. So we would just say like, no, we're going to take what we like of handlebars and make it and leave everything else. So let's talk about some of the things that it would fix. The first thing is there is no more implicit scope walking. So let's say you had a template that was going through each child, said name is blank years old. And I guess my son is going to be Joffrey, which I don't know if that's a reference to Game of Thrones, but thanks, Kevin, who wrote this up. Hopefully he's not going to be a monster, because this is definitely my daughter and her age. So really, really curious about why it's Joffrey. Not saying that all Joffreys are monsters, but most of them are. So the problem with this is it's gonna log, and I think he writes it like Joffrey is 33 years old because Joffrey doesn't have an age. So there's an implicit scope walking in stash, which confuses the heck out of everyone. So and it creates a lot of performance issues because we have to always walk up the whole scope then if we don't find Joffrey. So we would get rid of that. There would be no implicit scope walking, which you would have to do. So this is how you can prevent it now. So if you want to implicitly walk up the scope, you would have to do .. right, to go get the scope where you want it. You can't just rely on this walking up ability, which is just weird. And I mean, you almost never really want it. You never really want it to fall back to this age. It's a constant source of complaints and bugs, so we get rid of it. That's a breaking change. The other thing is we would remove automatic function calling. This, if you've ever tried to pass a function to as a value in, if you've ever tried to pass a function in a stash template, like you know, or as a part of a binding, you know how terrible that can be because you have to do something like my function, right? Instead of just, hey, my function. Well, the reason is because by default, stash and handlebars is supposed to call any function it finds, right? But now that we've got the call expression, that just seems silly, to be honest. So we would make it so you always have to call functions if you want functions called. But what that means is if you want to pass a function, well, it looks pretty straightforward. This is going to actually pass whatever my function is to foo on my component, right? That's nice. Next thing is we would remove the special keywords. This is these things can be really special and variable keywords too. We talked about this in a prior issue. Essentially, we'd have a scope. There'd only be one special key now, and that would be scope. And there would be like all of the special things that used to be there. You would do scope.index, or if you wanted a variable, scope.var, then the name of your variable. We would put it all in scope instead of using this like weird syntax that seems scary, % and pound. And the final thing we do.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say you've got about 30 seconds on this one. Yeah.
The final thing we would do is I've been working on and I've like nearly completed in my spare time this can parse project that allows you to set up a declarative parser. It is obviously, well, declarative parsers are far easier to use than like writing your own parser and far less error prone. We would start using that for parsing expressions. And Kevin nicely put a list of all of the expression problems with our expression parsing that just happened when we added bracket expressions because, hey, we thought we had it right, but then there are a whole bunch of other weird contextual problems with it that we didn't get right. You know, if we wanted to make any other future changes to parsing or add features, hey, this can parse would allow us to get much closer to things that JavaScript adds, like ... and, you know, I don't know, any other fun magic that JavaScript has. We could start building that in much easier than we can now with having to maintain a the parser as it works right now. So vote for this if you're like, hey, you know, I still don't mind stash, and I would rather take my existing templates and essentially what we would plan on doing, by the way, is warning people if they were making use of contextual looking up. So we would say, hey, this is a problem. This will not work. If you want that to happen, make sure you use .. or something like that. Same with automatic function calls. We would say, hey, make sure you put your parentheses in. Same with specials. We would give people warnings in 3.0 version to change their code so that they can move to this 4.0 version. So vote for this if you're like, hey, I don't want to rewrite all my templates, but I really do like these features and an improved stash, so I'd rather move to a stash 4.0. Doesn't mean we won't do both. We can obviously do both, but it's good to know what people feel. Okay, maybe this one will come to last, that one last. So this is make it easier to configure and understand can-set. So can-set is, well, I talk about the problems. The first is that its naming schemes are all rely heavily on set theory, that people understand set theory. People don't really understand set theory, or they do a little bit, but they're not familiar with it, where they are using like databases and SQL all the time. So one thing we would do is start shifting the names of things towards databases, SQL, and services instead of around sets. So can-set would really kind of disappear and become, what we'll see is can-query. And then the other thing that we're going to do is make it impossible to use, or difficult, not, you wouldn't use it at first, custom set objects. So what we make right now possible, which is nice, but makes things really difficult in reality, is we allow people, if their service layer looks like, hey, I want to get items 0 through 100, I'm going to have a slice with a start and a slice with an end. We allow people to say, hey, okay, this is what you're going to pass to something like a get list, right? But then then you have to do all of this weird configuration so that our set algebras know what that means backwards and forwards. And to write this is really tricky for people and very error prone. And it's just, nobody knows how to do it except for me, I feel like. So what we do is say, okay, the first thing is, there's kind of two parts to this. The first is we're going to agree upon a standard query type. Right? So all of whatever you pass to get list for pretty much all applications is going to look the same, unless you really, like, there's ways to make it not, but then you're back into this territory and you have to deal with it. But by default, we'd encourage people to use a standard query type. This is what would be passed to all of your get list and get list data. And can-query would be an implementation of can-set that only works with those standard query types. And there would also be a service constructor function that's used to essentially do the back and forth between the query type and what the server is expecting. This is actually a can-connect connection, but would be kind of a special one with a little bit more to it, but can be treated very similar to one. We'll see what that means in a second. So yeah, instead of being able to do get list slice first last 0, you would have to comply with the standard query object, which in this proposal would say there'd be for pagination, which is what you want here, you would use start and end. Actually, it's in the proposal, it's not start and end, it's skip and limit to match what MongoDB wants. So you'd actually have to do skip and limit. So the query type right now, as proposed, looks like this. You have a where, paginate, sort, and then also there's going to be some reserved words for kind of future, future things that we probably want to do. Select, related, and group. So where would be like your where clause for SQL. Paginate would be for your skip and limit, your pagination. Sort would be for sorting, and then these ones would be for your other clauses that do exist in kind of SQL, but we wouldn't be doing anything with them at first. So this just breaks down like what the and, this could be an and or an or clause, and it breaks down what an and clause could look like. An and clause is an object with either a property name or an instance value or some kind of qualifier, or it can be a $or to an or, which we'll see what those look like. Anyways, it breaks it all down. We can discuss the the standard query type. The standard query type would then have all of the same methods of can set, your has, subset, all of those kind of things. But it just, you have to pass it this standard query type. So then comes in.
Sorry to interrupt, Justin. Yeah. That's about all the time we have for this one.
Okay, I'm gonna have to keep going though for this one because I didn't get to the last part, but I'll make it fast. So the service type, what that really does is, I'll just show a quick example. The service type is supposed to take one of those queries and returns either a actual request, a promise that will resolve to the data for GetList data, or a request object that could just be passed to essentially can-ajax, right? So here I'm saying my server takes start and end. So I'm converting the queries skip and limit to start and end. And there's a reverse function you can also implement, which I forgot to return the final query, but that takes a request object and returns a query. And this would be used by can-fixture, and this would be used by like can-connect. So can-connect would get the query and then actually make the request. This is really a replacement for can-connect data URL. But I think it's much easier for people to understand like how to write this, to just transform a query to how they should make the request, than to actually like configure can set. So you would pass that your services to can-connect. I also talk about how there's be some simpler, more easy ones like a feather service one that would come with can service. So that's it for can service, or can set improvements. Final one is this will allow us to make our defined observables using decorators. Right now, you can do this, but it's a little bit cumbersome. So I can define a view model class, and then I can use the can define to define name as an observable name property with a default value of world. What this proposal would do is just allow us to make the same thing work, but if you just used an at-define decorator, and then you could do that before your class. And here is where all of your observable properties would need to be defined. So vote for this one if you really like decorators and ES classes. And that is it for me.
Cool. Thank you, Justin. That was really good. Matthew, do you want to talk about the DoneJS or StealJS issues?
No, not really.
Okay. End of hangout.
An option here. Okay. All right. Could be hard to follow up that enthusiasm, but I will try my best. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Phew. Okay. So we really need to have some way to show off DoneJS ecosystem packages. Let's create a page on DoneJS.com that like shows all the different plugins and generators and all that sort of thing. Kind of like CanJS has an ecosystem section on its website. I don't know what's going to happen there with the proposed redesigns, but presumably there's still going to be a place for that. So yeah, the problem is essentially we have a lot of developers who do make all sorts of components and generators and that sort of thing, but we don't have a good way to define those things. If someone builds a cool component and you want to like get other people to use it, all you can do is like word of mouth, try to get people to use it. If you're looking for a component that you need, you can search on npm and stuff like that. That works okay. That works pretty good, but it's not. There's not a central location just for DoneJS components and DoneJS plugins and that kind of thing. So yeah, this is the screenshot here. Is there's an organization called CanJS, which is by a couple of Batovians, and they have 31 different different repositories for different things, like components. So unless you like know these people or you've run across one of their components before, you might not know that these exist. So I think we can do better here. Let's add a page to donejs.com. Somewhere under the community, I would assume is where it would go. That's kind of up for discussion. I'm not a designer, so I don't have a great design. We'll leave that to the designers, but I think we want kind of the same types of information that you usually get from like a listing on github.com or a listing on NPM on the NPM's website when you search for things. This is what it might look like, but I guess we'll see. Kind of a key thing here is we want to make it very easy to contribute. Oh, I forgot to mention, once upon a time, we actually had this. I don't know if you heard of BitHub before, but there's an old version of BitHub, which was essentially kind of like a Reddit for Batovi and DoneJS types of things that allowed you to vote on things, which was really cool. But anyways, that's gone. So we want to keep this simple and make it easy for people to contribute. I would think that maybe having a separate repository where people can kind of submit pull requests to might be the way to go. That would probably make it simpler. Is just kind of have like a simple markdown file that maybe one for plugins and one for generators, or maybe even the same one. But all you gotta do is like add a link to your thing on there. Maybe this needs to be a little bit more complex. I'll get into that, but kind of like if you've ever submitted an ecosystem package to canjs.com, you have to do a little bit more. You have to submit like a link to where maybe this has changed actually, but you used to have to submit a link for like your GitHub star account and all that kind of thing. Anyways, you might have to do that, but I think it'd be better if we could keep it as simple as possible. Implementing this, like I said, we're going to have to get a designer to figure out what it should look like. We could, I thought it'd be cool if we had some type of like, we have BitDocs now to generate our website. If we had some type of BitDocs plugin that, maybe it could, just given this information, go out and get like a link, or it could add like a link to the GitHub stars, or maybe even could fetch like the NPM repository information. Display the README. Like we could go pretty far with this, possibly doing all this stuff possibly in the client. So yeah, I think we've talked a lot about having a central place to showcase all the different ecosystem packages, stuff that even stuff like DoneJS Firebase, which is kind of a first class generator, but it's one that the only way you'd even know about it is if you went through the guide. So yeah, that's that one. The second one is baseline PWA support. If you've never heard of PWA before, it stands for Progressive Web App. We've talked a lot about this in past DoneJS Contributor Meetings. What we kind of came up with is having a generator that could add PWA support to your package. So this is kind of this is the first, we say baseline, and the reason why, and I don't have now remember I don't have a link, but there actually is a link, kind of a requirements for something being considered PWA. And I actually listed those here. Your app needs to be served over HTTPS, which DoneServe now supports HTTPS, so you can do that already. It needs to be compatible with tablet and mobile. Obviously, we can't help you there, but we can give you a service worker, and we can give you a web app manifest. So the problem is that in order to be considered a PWA, in order to have, so I guess what you want if you're designing a mobile website is you want to have like a link to your users. You want to link on the user's home screen to your application and have it kind of launch as its own separate thing. But you can already do this on iOS, but for Android, you need to implement this web app manifest file. So yeah, in order for do that, you need a service worker and you need the web manifest file. So this proposal just does the baseline. We probably use Steel Service Worker, which is something that Julian created, that will generate a service worker script for you. We'd also, this would be a generator that would just generate all necessary files. It'd have to update your index.stash file to have a link to the manifest.json, I think is required. This is baseline support. This would kind of make way for some future improvements. There's a couple things that we probably wouldn't have at first. Data is not cached in service workers. If you're using CanConnect local storage, it'd be cached there, but that really only is useful for like GET requests. There's definitely scenarios where, like, if you have a form submission where, like, what happens when you're offline there? You probably, you might want to do something else. So like we might in the future be able to do something like have a queuing system to where we resubmit forms after you go back online. And there's also like an issue of how do you handle it? Maybe you want to actually have some way to, in the HTML, is we had an offline attribute or something like that, and then you can kind of disable your forms and other types of user inputs. But anyways, these are possible future improvements. If you're interested in PWAs and you want to get the ball rolling, vote for this one. All right, a better development console. So the problem is that DoneJS Develop, while very informative and contains a lot of information, everything that happens within your application on the server gets logged into the development console. It's not very clean, as you kind of see here. It doesn't matter what you do. You might make a typo in your application, which produces an error. You might change a file, which triggers like a live reload. Sometimes those live reloads will actually cause warnings to take place again. It's all kind of just listed, and as things are logged, they appear. So it's not super attractive. It's a little bit hard to parse. The solution would be to create new console interfaces. This is a proof of concept I did earlier this year. This is one that runs in the actual console. It's a curses-based approach. Not really necessarily what the final design would look like. It's just one idea I had. But the idea is that we can kind of segregate different types of information. We have a link here to where your server is, so you can open that. On the right here is live reload. So every time a file changes, you can see that it first has a little spinner as things are being updated, and you get a check mark when the live reload is complete. You get a list of like an access log for everything that's requested, and then you kind of just get kind of the raw input-output. Just one idea. So we have the implementation. We might do it a couple different ways. We might do something like this, or we might do something like in the browser. This is taken from a tool in the Clojure ecosystem called Figwheel. Figwheel is kind of it's a live reload sort of thing. But their UI actually exists in the browser. So when you make a change to your code, you actually get a little pop-up in the browser that kind of gives you error messages, or it might just tell you that the reload was successful. So that's one kind of approach we might go with. We want to make it possible for you to define your own UIs, or to install third-party UIs. So the API I'm proposing is a UI flag. In the name of an interface. So the way what this will work is, let's say you have, let me just skip ahead. You might pass UI curses, and what that is going to do is it's going to look for the doneserve UI curses npm module installed, and if you have that installed, it will require that and use that. And the interface that I'm proposing here is an event emitter. So if you want to define your own UI interface, you would just have a function that takes an event emitter, and you listen to different events. This is an example of how like the default UI, just the regular old CLI UI possibly be implemented, which it just listens to all these different events. For errors, it calls console.error. For console.log, or for regular logs, console log. For live reload, maybe it could do something different. So it's kind of how you would write your own interfaces. Like I said, there's two possible ones we might do. We might do like a cursus-based approach, kind of like I did in my proof of concept. We might do something like web-based. I don't know. It depends on what the users, what people actually want. If people want this, that is. So if you want this, vote for this, and yeah, definitely make your opinion heard on like what type of UI you think would be a good first one to work on. All right, that is improvements to our DoneServe development console. This one's going to be quicker because I don't know as much about it. This is something that Kevin, I think, built when he did DoneJS Mocha, the DoneJS Mocha generator. So it's actually possible, believe it or not, to, okay, let me back up. Whenever you call any generator commands, like say you do DoneJS add component, what it does is it takes a template file that has like your JavaScript, your Markdown, your test files, all that stuff, and it has a template, and it just kind of puts in the name of the component, for example. And that's what it writes out when it generates the files. There are some scenarios where you might want to like customize those a bit. What Kevin built is that if there's a .donejs folder, .donejs/templates folder that exists, it will look for the files in there first, and then it will use those templates in order to produce the files. So he did this for DoneJS Mocha. DoneJS Mocha, it writes to this folder, so it writes its own templates that that generate Mocha code, like describe and end and all that sort of thing. So it's created for that purpose, but it's not documented. So this is you have to kind of know what you're doing here, but this is something that we should document on how you actually use it. The bad thing here is that for this to work at all, you have to kind of manually copy these templates. You have to go into the generator DoneJS project, find the templates. Like let me show this to you real quick, if I can. You would have to go in and copy this file to the right location within your .donejs folder. So I thought, it's not actually useful enough just to document how to do that, I don't think, because we actually probably want some type of command, like DoneJS customize or something else. I don't really care, but some type of command that will pre-populate this folder with all of the existing templates. And then from there, we want documentation, maybe some type of customizing templates guide or something on donejs.com that people can then go through to figure out how to make changes to their local templates. Cool. That is all the DoneJS ones. Let me go to Steel. This is going to sound very familiar because this is pretty much very similar to what the proposal for CanJS CanJS.com doc changes. It was not intentional that I would do the same sort of thing. It just kind of happened. So the problem that we have is that our API docs are kind of grouped weirdly on StealJS.com. If you notice here, actually I'll just go to the website, why not? All this stuff is fine, I think, but down here we have guides, which these are kind of like step-by-step guides. And then we have topics, and topics are more like, they're topics. They're kind of high-level ideas, things you might want to know about. And the problem is that there's not really much overlap between the two. What I mean by that is there's a development bundles guide, which this tells you how to install development bundles and use it. Actually, this one's okay. Actually, that's not a good one to pick on. Probably one of the ones I did. Let's see, maybe optimized builds. Yeah, optimized builds goes through cloning a project. It's a step-by-step guide, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's no central place to learn about optimized builds. So what I'm proposing is having is reorganizing these by topics, similar to I think what Justin was talking about by having like topics related to like observables and view and that kind of thing. And what I would want is, we have different high-level topics like hot module swapping, live reload. If you notice, there's no live reload topic here. Currently, if you want to learn about live reload, you have to know where to find it in the API page. That's actually kind of the biggest problem that we have in the Steel docs, is that there's not like a clear API page to visit for a lot of things, because a lot of things are kind of split between the front end and in Steel tools. So knowing like where to look is not so obvious. So I kind of see these things as being almost portals. I don't know if I like that word, but there'd be a hot module swapping portal, which would take you to a page which explains what hot module swapping is. It shows you how to add hot module swapping to your project. And then it links to like the API documentation, so you can learn how to use the Steel tools live reload command on the CLI, and it shows you how to the documentation for all the different APIs that are possible with the live reload module. And then it would probably link to like guides and that sort of thing as well. So this way, like, because I think this is what people are looking for. They're looking for more topics. They're like looking, how do I do circular dependencies, and how do I do conditional loading? Yeah, I don't know what the design will look like for this. I'm not even sure if there will necessarily be any design changes. It will mostly just be writing some new documentation that we don't have around this topic, some more high-level documentation, and just moving things around. So that is improving, I guess you could just say improving documentation on StealJS.com through reorganization. All right, next we have allowing transpiling module formats other than like ES modules. Currently, only ES modules, those are the modules that contain the import and export keyword. Those are the only ones that go through Babel. So if you're using CommonJS or AMD or something, those don't get transpiled. The problem is really like if you're not starting a new project, if you have an existing code base that's using like CommonJS, you might still want the benefits of transpiling. You might want to be able to use arrow functions and that sort of thing, but still target older browsers that don't support those things. So currently, in order to try to do this in Steel, you have to convert all your modules to ES modules, which can be cumbersome a lot of the time. And for very large files, it's not even worth the effort to try to do that. The solution I came up with is just a very simple API. Just transpile true in your package.json. This would be, I want to make this package specific. So instead of transpiling everything everywhere, I wanted to make it possible so that you can transpile only for that specific package, which is, we don't actually have, we have package configuration. Well, actually, we don't have any, I don't think we have any package specific configuration yet. So this is one thing I'd like to fix in the process is,
plugins is package specific.
Okay, that is, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's like if you add Steel CSS in your
other
plugins,
things can get it.
Other things
you can get it, or your parent can get it.
Right. Yes. It is global. Yeah.
The map stuff isn't local to that. I guess they can be applied to other things. Yeah, sure. Should that be handling like transpile true, but is that just going to use whatever transpiler? Would you need to make it so that it can have different transpilers for different projects?
So there already is a transpiler with an R. And are you still talking about like Babel versus the other?
Or like different versions of Babel?
Those, different versions of Babel. I hadn't thought of that. That probably is possible.
Vote for this and we'll do it.
Maybe. Yeah, as long as we have the contextual information of what's actually importing it, we can import Babel relative to that module, and maybe it would work. I don't know. That might be a hard one. But where was I? Yeah. So yeah, this actually fixes two problems. Is we can start to make configuration localized, contextual to the package that it's running in, which we'll have to figure out how to do that over time, like what actually becomes contextual and what's not. But anyways, this would allow you to do that. So like for example, set transpile true, and you have your transpiling of classes, and it would happen. So you're still able to use CommonJS. All right. Next is tree shaking. Tree shaking is kind of a funny word, but it kind of makes sense too. We want to update StealTools process to support this. So the problem that tree shaking solves is kind of this case where maybe you're using this third-party utility library, and it exports a bunch of different functions. You know, these are just kind of like utility functions, and the only one that you use is the flatten function. Well, currently what's going to happen is all of this code, all of HiDash, is going to be compiled and is going to be part of your JavaScript bundle. But because we know that you only use flatten, tree shaking is a way of saying, hey, we can go ahead and like get rid of this, and that will just go away. And anything that's it's nice is that anything that intersection like uses internally, if intersection uses some other function, and that function is also not used elsewhere, well, we can like get rid of that one too. So it's really interesting technique. So we can. There's already some libraries that do this. Rollup kind of popularized this. Rollup is a bundler itself, but from what I understand, it can be used kind of as a library as well. I think Webpack and System.js already use it internally. So the reason I bring this up is we wouldn't have to kind of implement the tree shaking algorithm ourselves. We could just hopefully just use this. There's another one called CommonShake, which it's the same thing, but it works with CommonJS as well. Rollup only works with ES format. CommonJS works with CommonJS. I think it probably has some limitations since CommonJS can be more dynamic, but I think as long as you use it the way that you typically would use it in the front-end application, that would work. And as far as I know, I don't think any other bundlers are using that yet. So that'd be kind of cool if we could say that we have tree shaking for both ES and CommonJS formats, which are, you know, by far the two most popular formats that people use. Which I mean, all of CanJS would be tree shaken as well. Which I don't know if there's a whole lot of waste in CanJS, but there's probably some. Since we have the modular structure, it's probably less common nowadays. All right, that is tree shaking. Next is it's a removing something. So Justin had one removing something, so I didn't feel as bad. What was yours, Justin? You were removing scope stuff. Yeah, you're removing scope stuff. I'm removing automatically loading of the main. So it's StealJS.com. If you've used it, you probably used it this way, where you just add a script tag which points to StealJS inside of node modules. It's going to load your package.json, find your main, and automatically load your main. Now you might say, why would you want to get rid of that? Because that's pretty cool, right? It is, but then from a learning perspective, it's kind of difficult because you don't realize what it's doing necessarily. It's just kind of like magic almost. Then when you need to load a test file, you kind of have to learn that there is this main attribute, and part of it maybe we don't document all this as well as we could. But you have to learn that there's a main, and you can point your file at the main. Where it becomes really difficult is like in demo pages, where you don't actually want to load a main at all. Then it's kind of like, then now you really have to like dig and try to figure out how to like make it not load your main application. Or actually, maybe it's okay if it does load the main application sometimes, but oftentimes it's not because there's usually side effects. Anyways, for that case, there's a special @empty module, which is basically it's like a no op. It's just a module that doesn't have any exports. So the difficulty is that the common case, the difficulty is really that even though this is the first thing that you learn when you use Steal, it's the least common thing in writing, an application. You write an application with modlets, the modlet structure, you're going to write a lot of test.html files. You're going to write a lot of demo files. Those are the things you're actually using more often than anything else, but they're the more difficult thing to use. So solution is get rid of it, make it a little bit more convenient in that you can provide the tilde, and tilde becomes like a valid module specifier, so that if you do the tilde, it's going to know to load your main. So that's kind of the compromise, is that you do have to write main, but you can just do it this way. But everything else should work. Like when Steal tools, it builds out a steal.production.js, which automatically loads the main. All of that should continue to work. You won't have to worry about any of that sort of thing. So yeah, this case becomes the index.html case becomes like this, but then like something like a demo page, instead of being like that, it becomes, you don't have to worry about that empty. Don't have to know it. So this is really good for new users, is really what this is targeting. And this will be a breaking change. So yeah, this is something that until we have Steal 2.0, which is probably some proposals maybe we'll talk about next time, we won't be able to do this. All right, lastly, I don't know if Adam is listening, but he was the person who requested this. This is well, fully support is probably not the right way to describe it, because we don't support it at all. But there is a package called babel-preset-env. This is kind of a technical one, so I'll try my best to explain. So if you've used Babel anytime recently, you know that you have to list like specifically what stuff you want to transpile. If you want to transpile classes, you have to provide the plugin. Luckily, Steal makes it easy by like giving you all of them for free. But if you want fine-grained control, you can do that in Babel. But what this means is that you do have to know, a lot of like very technical stuff, which is kind of good, but at the same time, it's difficult. So if you don't want all that knowledge, if you want to just say, hey, I want to support IE 9, or I want to support IE 10, or I just want to support only modern browsers, what babel-preset-env does, let me see if I can find the docs for that, is you just say all browsers target the last 2 versions of and Safari greater than or equal to 7. So you can do this kind of thing. And then it will know all of the plugins that are necessary, all the transpiling stuff that's necessary. So it's a really cool utility. Unfortunately, it does not work in Steal, and the reason why is that it does like cite some dynamic requiring. I think based off of off the configuration, it only requires the stuff that it needs, which is not really something that Steal does. Steal traces, it takes the source code file and it looks for require calls, and it kind of marks those as dependencies. Since these are all dynamic, it doesn't pick up any of the dependencies. So internally, when this module starts requiring things, it throws an error because those are not registered as dependencies. So to work around this, I wanted to have like some special meta configuration that kind of allows this kind of sneaky thing to happen. Because luckily, even though babel-preset-env doesn't depend on all of these modules, all these modules are already loaded because they're loaded in our we have like we have a bundle with all of the Babel plugins already as part of Steal. So we already have all the code that babel-preset needs. We just don't allow it to use it. So this is just kind of, it's really just fixing a special case. to where we're going to allow this to do some sneaky dynamic requires. So yeah, making babel-preset-env work. If that's something that you want to use in your project, give this one a thumbs up. And I think I did them all. I think I did them all.
Yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you, Matthew. That was a good job describing all of them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything that they want to say about the survey?
We might want to talk about how it's going to be used.
Sure. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So the plan is we're going to run the survey until next Wednesday, and then everybody kind of on the open source team, we're going to discuss the results of which we're going to present that next Friday. We'll see how people voted. And then what we're going to use is how people voted to inform how we're going to do the for like the next 6-week cycle. 6 weeks from now, there's going to be another survey with things that we didn't do and maybe some new things or things that we think now are more important. So every 6 weeks, there's going to be a new survey like this. And then the week after the survey, we're going to discuss about like the thing and kind of debate the things that we really want to accomplish for the next 6 weeks. The survey is not like, it's not like whatever gets the most number of votes wins. In fact, I think what's closer to what's going to win are the things that, because we have to, during this next week, we're still going to be kind of measuring and trying to write up for the issues, how long we expect them to take. So let's just say, for example, CanJS got number 1, right? But that's a pretty challenging task. But can-stache got like half as many votes, but is like at least half as easy to accomplish. We're going to heavily weigh, and it's kind of one thing that we've talked about in terms of Batovi's priorities for like our time, is we are going to weigh ease of accomplishment pretty heavily, right? If something is relatively highly voted, but it's super easy to do and can be done in like a few days, well, that's a big that's a big reason to do it. So all of those things are going to kind of get filtered in, and we'll post the results, and then we'll kind of discuss what we think we should do, really. And I guess in the end, it's going to be for like the, I kind of determined Batovi's resourcing, and then it's going to be Matthew on StealJS and DoneJS and Kevin on CanJS really making the final call for Batovi's resourcing, what they're going to be working on. So I think, I don't know if there's any questions about that, but that's essentially the plan, is every 6 weeks. And then hopefully by next survey, the next survey should go out with kind of announcements like, oh, we've done this one, we've done this one, here you can read about it here, and here's some, we're maybe 90% through this one. So my hope is that every 6 weeks we're showing kind of these substantive community-driven improvements around our open source.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. Thanks, Justin. So the survey is going to go out sometime after this Hangout ends. If you already signed up for the email list, then you'll receive it via email, and you can do that right now. I'll drop a link everywhere again, but donejs.com/survey.html. And then on that page, we'll also have the survey once it's live. So if you hadn't signed up for the email list, you'll still be able to complete the survey and provide your email then. And so we have, on the survey, we'll have all of the options that we talked about in the Hangout today. And we'll also have an other for each project. So if there's something that you that we didn't include that really interests you, then feel free to drop a link to a GitHub issue to express your interest in that. Cool. Any other questions, comments about the survey before we can do statuses? Nope. Okay. Yeah, let's run through statuses. Matthew, would you mind starting?
No, I would not.
Okay.
I would not mind. Yeah, so last week there was a problem with DoneSSR tests failing in CI. Turns out there were some legit bugs there. So I released a couple of versions of DoneSSR patch releases this last week that resolved those issues. I think we're up to 1.15 now. Also, there's a problem with DoneJS CI failing. Something changed in Travis that caused this. So if anyone's doing open source projects that use Firefox, you get some kind of weird gconf error or something like that. You actually have to change your Travis YML file. So I fixed that. And now I'm working on SSR zones. So taking everything that done SSR and moving those into different zone plugins. And this makes it easier to kind of mix and match different parts. You can use can-simple DOM, or you can use JS DOM. So I created a zone for using JS DOM instead of can-simple DOM. Created one that does push, H2 push for images, so you can actually push out images, which is pretty cool. So I'm making a bunch of these things. The plan is to make all of these, make them kind of easily usable, probably mostly within DoneSSR. So you can use them externally without using like DoneSSR itself. And then I'll update DoneSSR to like use all this stuff internally. So you get incremental rendering, all this sorts of things. You kind of mix and match yourself. So I'm going to continue working on those next week.
Cool. Sounds good. Justin.
And nobody can hear what I'm saying. I worked on I've been working a little bit, besides writing a bunch of the proposals that we just went through. I worked a little bit on making CanReflect work on map and set and their weak variant types, because I'm writing up. I basically wrote an article on CanReflect and can-symbol, and I'm rewriting it to be as awesome as the topic really deserves. So look forward to seeing that next week.
Cool. Sounds good. Brad, you want to go?
Sure. My big thing from this week was actually releasing can-stache 3.8. That covers essentially some extensions to how you can import and the with helper. I don't know if you have time for a demo now. It seems like we're getting pretty on in the time here. Might just punt it out to next week. But that was my big thing, plus a couple small patch upgrades. CanReflect Promise is now actually working with Internet Explorer. The tests are broken out to jQuery and not, and it's ready for integration into the CanJS repo, ready for 3.11. And also, I made a patch release yesterday to CanConnect to remove the dependency on CanUtil Ajax. And that will remove the deprecation warning from your console when you're looking at anything with CanConnect in dev mode, if you'd like to upgrade. Next week, I'm almost certain we're going to get 3.11 out the door. I know we've been promising it for a few weeks now, but we're actually at the review stage for almost everything. There's like one in progress ticket right now, so I'm feeling pretty confident about that. And that's it for this week.
Cool. Sounds good. Sheriff, do you have anything to share?
Not really, because I was not available these last couple of weeks. I was busy with work a little bit. So hopefully next week I will try to help and solve some issues in CanJS or DoneJS, and feel free to assign me on any of the issues if you see I can help with that.
Awesome. Sounds great. And then for me, so started off the week with getting the survey landing page on DoneJS.com for people to sign up, and this week just kind of reached out to people, wrote a blog post, tried to publicize it as much as possible. And I'm working on linking to the survey from CanJS, DoneJS, and StealJS.com too. So I'm hoping to get that out the door today. And then next week, at the end of the week, we'll have the survey results, and then we'll be starting our first 6-week product cycle the following week. So I've got some work to do to prep for that. So that's me. Oh, also, I want to pimp out, I had two, I've been mentioning them for a little while. I have 2 articles that were published on CSS tricks. So the first one was the key to building large JavaScript apps. It talks about how we use the Modlet workflow to build apps. And then the second article was how to implement the Modlet workflow in existing projects or in new projects with StealJS. So this is like a step-by-step tutorial to using StealJS to create a Modlet and create a demo and test page. So if you haven't seen those yet, check them out. I'll drop links everywhere to those. Cool. Did anyone have anything else before we go?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Julian, who he was here, but I think he was having problems with the sound. He submitted a PR this morning that fixed an issue with StealTools Optimize. Did not work with bundle assets, so he fixed that and submitted a PR. So thanks, Julian.
Props to Julian. Yeah. Cool. Anything else? Nope. Okay. Everyone who watched this on YouTube, either the live stream or afterwards, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next week with the results of the survey. Have a good week.